So, boy, I think you got the point, didn't you? Right? Trade costs did not fall, and therefore we reject that as a contributor. So is it foreign supply or European demand generating the shifts? There's the foreign supply, and the cool thing about using a simple tool like this is it predicts what we should observe for price behavior, data that we got. Let's see if I can go backwards on this. Can I go backwards? Is this backwards? How do I go backwards? How do I go backwards on this? That button. Yes. Isn't that great? Okay. So you get an outward shift in Asian or Latin American supplies, and let's see what the prediction ought to be. The prices, the market is being flooded with pepper in Amsterdam as a result. So you should see the prices dropping in the Amsterdam market for that stuff. You also should see it dropping in the Moluccas as well with this augmented supply. Did they or did they not behave that way? Alternatively, suppose most of the work is this outward shift in import demand in Europe. What would you observe then? Increase in price in London and Amsterdam of all these exotics, and increase in price in the supply side. Did they or did they not? So this is quite explicit prediction on the direction of price movements, so that you can easily infer whether it's foreign supply or domestic demand doing the work and pushing these around. So all you have to do is simply change this from this cartoon, this supply and demand cartoon, into a set of equations. So have an equation for each one of these, for the demand, supply, and the market clearing, and add bells and whistles, and guess at parameters, and you can actually convert this to something you can really estimate. I'm not going to tell you about how I did that. But here are the facts that matter. First thing is, price incentives did not pull Columbus and da Gama out there to do their thing. There's no evidence across the 15th century of a rise in the prices of the commodities that are eventually traded that would provoke an incentive to get more involved in investing in these trade routes. So instead, it had to be something else. Apparently, it wasn't economic, but rather religion. That's a big one for the Portuguese. World power domination? Yeah, that could well be. Fame and fortune. Anyway, it's not incentive through the price mechanism that's inducing it. The price evidence does not confirm that. Second, we're going to see that the relative prices of these things fall a lot at the start, in the 16th century, suggesting that it's a supply boom in the European trading partners that's doing the work. But it doesn't continue that way, because in the 17th century it changes and the relative prices rise, suggesting that, now demand conditions in Europe are dominating. Why? What's going on in accounting for that reversal? Fourth, 18th century, it looks like we're in a transition period where the supply conditions abroad and the demand conditions at home pretty much wash out or offset each other. Then the 19th century, you get this really dramatic change with the fall in the relative price of the importables in European markets. So it's clear, and that's in spite of the fact that you're starting an industrial revolution in Europe, and the growth rates are rising, the demand for everything is rising, including the demand for tradables. And you'd think that would kind of edge up the prices. It does not. Those prices of tradables are dropping in those markets quite dramatically, suggesting two things. Number one, it must be supply conditions abroad, or now we're in an era where the trade costs are dropping. You're in the first global century, and those trade costs are starting to drop. Those state monopolies are eliminated, the European countries go liberal, and so on and so forth. It turns out that the conditions in Asia and the Americas are different. Asia matters a lot more in this story than do the Americas. And it might relate to the problems in Latin America to supply exportables to the world market when their labor force is diminished by 95% in the 16th century. What else we got? Right. Over the whole period, it looks like overseas supply side forces are what mattered most, especially in Asia. Okay, so now what I have to do is to try to uncover what's driving the demand in Europe. We know what kind of commodities we're talking about. We're talking about spices that only the rich consume. We're talking about fine textiles that only the rich can consume. So it's going to be driven by demands coming from the relatively well-to-do. And so anything that improves their relative position will augment trade as a result in that period. Import demand mattered. We want to look for those forces. Yep, just said that. Yep. We're talking about an episode in the world where the world is agricultural. And so the only factors of production that matter really are land and labor. Don't have to worry about human capital. Don't have to worry about financial capital and all that stuff. Life is simpler, just land and labor. And if you have land, you're rich. If I don't have it, I'm poor. And that's the way life was. And anything that would change the relative endowments, the amount of land, labor on land, will have an impact on those relative rewards and the level of inequality in those societies. So anyway, you estimate the surplus at the top, and that's what you find. Whoops. Yeah. And that's what you find. You find, again, you know, this is not a double-digit world, but these growth rates are enough for the surplus to crank up import demand and have the results on the trade boom that we want to see. Okay, so you construct this model and and there's the one that we like best, and there's the answer you get. The answer you get is over the full period from Columbus and da Gama to 1800, 61.3% of the European trade boom is accounted for by demand conditions in Europe. And the demand conditions that matter are what's happening to the relative income at the top. That is the rents accruing to the landed elite in the story. Now, this 61.3% is interesting because there seems to be a rule, may not be 61.3, but how about 62%? That's a 62% rule. You get to go out of the room with a rule, write down 62%. He said it. What do I mean? Okay. So why does that say 61.8? Before we had 61.3. I think I wrote down the wrong number. Anyway, between 1870 and 1913, during the first global century, when you do the same analysis, probably on better data, but in a bigger trade boom, the answer you get is 57% of the world trade boom is simply explained by income growth. That's what's doing all the work. And if you do it again in the post-World War II period and ask what's doing all the work during the first part of the post-war globalization boom from the 50s to the 80s, you get 67%. So I figure you average those up and you get 62%. So it's a 62% rule that's emerging out of this data and what's accounting for the trade boom. I think this is interesting because given the modern debate about whether or not trade creates inequality, which is based on one key premise that you're taught in introductory trade theory, and that is the Heck-Schroline theorem and the Heck-Schroline model, which would imply that if I go liberal and I'm well endowed with labor, then my labor-intensive industries are going to boom, and that's going to drive up the relative scarcity of unskilled labor and create a more egalitarian society. That's the prediction. Whereas it's the other way around, economies that are well endowed with human capital go open, they're going to export all the high-skilled stuff and the human capital-intensive stuff, and that will drive up the returns to skills and those with education and create more inequality. And it's that kind of thinking that led economists to predict the explanation for the immense move towards inequality in America and some parts of Europe from the 1960s and 70s to the present. We lost an egalitarian society, and now we live in one that's just as unequal as it was at its peak in America in the late 1920s. Robber baron eras and all that stuff. And they're doing the same thing that they did then. Now, so there's an argument that says trade has an impact on distribution and can have an impact on inequality. And when you look at this experience after Columbus, you find a very different connection. Instead, it's inequality driving the trade. Whatever increased the inequality in Europe and Western Europe, which increased the size of the surplus that could be used for importing these exotics, is going to be the key. And the story is quite simple then. If there were Malthusian forces that increased the pressure on the land, reduce the labor-to-land ratio, or increase the labor-to-land ratio, reduce the land-labor ratio, then that's going to increase the rents on land, and the landed elite that control the land and own the land, of course, will be enriched, and it'll create inequality. And that's what's going on in Europe during this period, and creating these immense inequality changes and yielding the trade boom. So it seems to me striking that you can reverse the standard causality by looking at this historical example.